Aye, so just thought I would make a wee video this afternoon because I was out last night for me and my dad went out to meet a distant cousin, I suppose, of ours. We went out to meet a cousin who's a fourth cousin of my dad's, so fourth cousin once removed of myself. A gentleman called Alistair Henderson, who's similar ages with my dad. And the story of our kind of connection is all to do with family history and doing genealogical research. And it sort of relates to, I suppose the reason I'm making this video is to talk about how it's been meaningful, how genealogy can turn into something meaningful, and not just making trees on a digital page or charting trees on paper, but how doing that work can translate into something meaningful and tangible in the present day. So it all relates to Tyree, it all relates to myself and my work over the years trying to trace my ancestors, but not just my ancestors. That turned into me trying to trace any descendants of my ancestors, an extended Tyree family who might be alive today, because me doing research into my Tyree family was a voyage of discovery very much for me, or rediscovery for my family, and for myself and for my dad, because one of the inspirations for me doing genealogical research in the first place, becoming interested in it, was from my dad, and his own interest. We as a family in the present day, if you like, had lost a lot of our knowledge of our paternal ancestry, and there was very specific reasons for that, and our paternal ancestry in relation to tracing it back to Tyree. And the reason for that was just that unfortunately there was a series of unfortunate events insofar as there was the men in our family have tended to die young, and died when their eldest sons were still only children themselves, and therefore were unable to, that knowledge of where they had come from had been wasn't really passed down, and children took more to do with their mothers, were raised more with their mother's side of the family. A couple of cases in point would be my grandfather, for example. My grandfather's father, my great-grandfather, died in 1929, so at that time, of pneumonia. And at that time, my grandfather was only about 11 or 12 years old. So after his father died, he took much more to do, essentially, with his mother's side of the family, and his mother's, which makes sense. And his mother's side of the family were from the Campbellton, sort of Kintyre area. So he took much more to do with his maternal side of the family, which we know a lot more about, or knew much more about in the present day. By the time, obviously, my father and then you get myself, we knew much more about that side of our family history. And going back, so the Henderson side, the paternal Henderson side of the family, kind of knowledge of that lineage had been kind of broken, and it had not just been broken once, it had actually been broken twice, because obviously I've mentioned my great-grandfather dying young in life. It unfortunately survived the horrors of the First World War, but came home and then died of something like pneumonia, which is one of those tragedies of life, and the fact that we hadn't discovered penicillin at the time that he had died, so something that was probably treatable, much more easily treatable now. Was a pneumonia was a big killer, even in the early 20th century. But my great grandfather likewise may not have had a huge amount of knowledge about his Tyree ancestry either. Now, my great grandfather was born in Glasgow, but his father, my great great grandfather, Archibald Henderson, was born in Tyree. He was born in Kilmalloy. But he died also reasonably young, in 1903. He died when my great grandfather was again only about 10 or 12 years old, between 10 and 12 years old. So again, that's another example of a generation that was growing up without a clear, distinct knowledge of, presumably, of their paternal ancestry. So it's a bit of a double whammy for our family. So you can see how, so there's the paternal line is surviving, but it's only surviving, it's not surviving, the adult males in the family had died, and two consecutive generations had died young, and obviously knowledge hadn't been able to get passed on of where they had originally come from. So my father, he was interested in family history and genealogy in the 1980s. It would have been, he hired a genealogist to try and trace to trace where the Hendersons had originally come from, because he didn't know, and certainly my grandfather didn't have a lot of knowledge either. And these are the days, it's really, computers were still in their infancy, I suppose, at that time, and the genealogist sent the results of the report, the client study that the genealogist had did for my dad, was sent in the mail, and my dad was obviously surprised to find out that the lineage traced back to the island of Tyree, and he took the same results to show my grandfather, and my grandfather was just as surprised as he was to see Tyree, and mentioned they had I think my grandfather had a sense that, or had a feeling that there was a connection potentially to Fort William in the Strontian area, which is not entirely incorrect, because but again, that's going through a maternal line, because that would have been his mother, had connections. My grandfather's grandmother had connections to that area of Scotland, but again, they didn't know anything about the paternal side having Tyree connections. So all this is to say that the discovery of Tyree, any kind of Tyree connections, was a rediscovery for myself and for our family. So when I started to uncover all the Tyree connections and chart the family tree, it became evident to me that Henderson was a reasonably uncommon name on Tyree, which was very interesting to me in itself, and has led to much of my curiosity as to how and why the Henderson family ended up in Tyree when they did arrive there in the late 18th century. And that's probably a topic for another time. But there were not that many Hendersons on the island. I suppose at any given time, really. There was Hendersons that appeared in the west end of the island, around the area of Greenhill, and then Moss, and then also Hendersons coming in who were resident in Ballymartin. Turns out that they were all basically one and the same family, who were coming across originally from Ardnamurchan, and then being resident in Mull for a period of time, having children there, meeting wives, and then being brought over from Mull to Tyree. And so yeah, a big part of my journey in charting the family tree has been recording who all these Hendersons were, where they were living on Tiree. But then I became interested to know, because we're not a massive family, what were the chances of there being any living descendants today, that I would have any distant cousins, and what happened to the various lines that originate in Tiree. So years ago, I was tracing down as many lines as I could, of the Henderson lines that originate in Tiree, trying to find if there was any living descendants. And it was difficult, because you go down, there's so many times as you'll find if you're doing genealogical research of that nature, is that you'll go down lots of dead ends. Essentially, you'll go down so far and then a line dies out. So it's a lot of hard work. But I did years ago manage to trace one particular line of Hendersons that still had who are still on the go today, and basically that was a line that came from my great grandfather's brother. So my great grandfather was a man called Hector Henderson, who was born in Greenhill. He was born in 1812. Hector was born there, and he had a brother, Duncan Henderson, who ended up residing at Moss. Duncan was born, Hector's younger brother was born a few years later in 1815. And so this line of Hendersons that I was able to trace, still living today, were the descendants of my great grandfather's brother. And I found a couple of guys living in England who are brothers today, an Ian Henderson and an Alistair Henderson, and through various means was able to reach out to trace them, track them down and reach out to them, and just let them know of our connection, and see if they would be interested in knowing these Henderson cousins that myself and my father are in Glasgow. So it was over recent years, it's been a really nice thing for me and my dad to make that connection with Ian and Alistair Henderson. As I say, my dad's fourth cousins, my fourth cousin, once removed, and they come up to Scotland regularly. They come back to Tiree, and they certainly come up to Scotland, and we meet with them on occasion or at any time they're in Glasgow. We'll take the opportunity to catch up with them if we can. So last night, Alistair Henderson has been up visiting Scotland, and I was out in Glasgow with him and my dad last night. But it's a really nice thing to sit and talk about Tiree, sit and talk about our family history, about what happened, what's happened in his life, what's happened in their lives, what their knowledge is of their heritage, if any, and just charting out what's happened to both our families over the years. But I just think I was actually thinking about it this morning before I started making this video, I wonder what my great grandfather would have thought, or could he ever have imagined that his great grandson and his great grandson, and Duncan's great grandson, his brother, would be meeting up in the year 2026 in Glasgow for a beer, and chatting about them and talking about and trying to think about what their lives were like, and what life in Tiree was like in the mid 19th century when they were kicking about. It's a nice thing, and it gives me a sense of pride as well. I think that we're able to honour their legacy and their memory as well. Again, a big thing that we were talking about last night is that we don't have rose tinted spectacles about how difficult life in Tiree was in the 19th century. I would love to have been able to speak to these guys about what a day in their lives was like. You can read books and try and get as much insight about it as you can, but it only takes you so far, and it would have been great to have a wee window into just what a day in their life looked like, from morning till evening. But yeah, as I say, it's just I just thought I would come on to say how I think it's important for me anyway what has been important for me is that life is short for all of us. It can be, you never know. Don't want to sound all doom and gloom, but you never know. You never know when your time's up, and so I think it's important to take opportunities when you can. And when it comes to genealogy, yeah, there's plenty of times when you might reach out to people and they might not be interested. They might not be interested in history. They might not be interested in family history. You could, but reaching out to people who may be distant cousins. But occasionally you will find people who are interested, and if you've got knowledge that they don't have, they'll be keen to find that out, as has been the case with the connections that myself and my dad have made with our cousins in England. And yeah, I just think it can become become a really meaningful thing to do, because what I'm trying to say is to take opportunities when you can. Take those windows of opportunity, because there have been other people who I've met and people have had interactions with in my family history journey over many years. And again, I was thinking about it last night when I was chatting with my dad and my cousin, that I'm glad that I took the opportunities to reach out to people when I did and when I could. One of the things that can be really frustrating for me anyway, as a researcher and a historian, trying to make sense of the past, is that, like, so a good example would be the recordings that were made that are accessible on the Tober and Dulcas website, where you can access recordings made by the School of Scottish Studies field workers, who set up the School of Scottish Studies at Edinburgh University in the late 1950s, and were out doing fieldwork recording people all around Scotland in the 70s. Well, in Tiree specifically, the recordings are available from the mid-1970s. You get the likes of Hamish Henderson, the famous folklorist, and people like Eric Cregeen and Dr. Margaret Ann Mackay, and even Tiree's own Professor Donald Meek, who were doing really excellent fieldwork in those days, recording the old people on the island, and recording the old ways and the old genealogies and really important cultural information about Tiree. And in some instances they've recorded people who I'm related to. So another distant cousin of mine was John Henderson of Moss, who was recorded by Hamish Henderson on the island. And it's really tantalising for me, because they'll talk about stuff, or even when there's other people being interviewed, like Sir Hector Kennedy was recorded often by Eric Cregeen in the 1970s on Tiree, and they speak extensively about the area around Moss and other townships as well, but obviously Moss being of specific interest to me and the families that were staying there. And they'll mention sometimes the Hendersons at Moss and who was in what cottage and how they were related to other families and things like that. And sometimes you're desperate to dive into the conversation. So tantalising, because they'll mention some area of interest in a conversation, and then quickly move on to start speaking about something else, and it's tantalising, but it is for me anyway, because I can pick up wee bits of information, but you would just love the opportunity to stop them and to and to ask follow-up questions. But I mention Eric Cregeen in that context because he was, as I say, one of those field workers who did tremendous work on Tyree. He was a great man in his own right. Certainly academically, he wrote extensively about Tyree, and unfortunately Eric died as a young in 1983, the year before I was born. So I didn't get the opportunity to ever meet him and talk to him about his experiences of doing that field work on Tyree, and I would have loved to. But he did leave behind a legacy of his work. Certainly he, in conjunction with the School of Scottish Studies, published the 1779 census, I think, of Tyree. I think he was involved in that as well, the publishing of that. But certainly the Duke of Argyll's instructions to his factors in Tyree in the 18th century, Eric Cregeen was responsible for publishing those, that work, and which has been invaluable to myself. But the book was out of print, or is out of print, I believe, when I was taking an interest in the subject, and I was able to track down Eric's widow, Lily Cregeen, who was at the time that I was becoming very keen and interested in this work and this research. Was living in Kintyre, and I was able to call her and speak to her over the phone, explain who I was, that I was I was starting a career in genealogical work, and I was asking her about her husband's book, about the Tyree instructions, and she said, "Oh yeah, I'll send you Eric's copy," and I was blown away by that by her kindness in doing so. She sent me Eric's book, which I have to this day. It sits behind me on my bookshelf there. You can see it from here. It's a blue book, which is really meaningful again for me because it's something that Eric worked on and held in his hands, and I never get the opportunity to meet him personally, but have something that he. That's probably the next best thing for me, to have in my hands and in my own custody, something that was a product of his hard work, and it's something he actually held in his hands. And it was really kind of his widow Lily Cregeen to send me that, and I sent her a big bunch of flowers to say thank you. And she was a lovely lady, and I never got to meet her in person either, but we chatted again on the phone after she had sent me the book, and I made sure she'd got her flowers, which she was very happy with. And she's unfortunately, Lily has in the past few years has passed away. I've found out. I think she lived until her 90s, but she's passed away. But again, why am I talking about any of this? Because I'm saying that I'm glad that I took that window of opportunity to reach out to Lily when I did. I never got a chance to meet her husband. I never got a chance to, which I would have loved to. I'd love to have had the chance to meet them both, but I took the opportunity that was available to me at the time, and when you do that, it can bear fruit, and can, as I say, Eric remains an inspiration to me in the work that I've done over the years, and will hopefully now continue to do. And yeah, again, just trying to make the point that you should don't be afraid to take opportunities. Now is the best time. The best time to do these things was yesterday. So take your chance. I mean, it was, as I say, you can reach out to people and nothing happens. But what's the worst that can happen? Someone says they're not interested, what's the worst that can happen? But obviously the best that can happen is that you do make these really meaningful connections in the present, and that's what it's all about.